When I teach people about, evaluating animals, a lot of times we're looking at a group of sheep, we're looking for indexes of their nutritional management, how well they're being fed. I'm also looking for a bunch of things. I'm looking for their color of their mucous membranes of their eyes, if I'm looking at individual exam. And that's going to give me an insight into if they're heavily parasitized or not. Okay, I don't have a FOMACHA card on me. I actually left it in the barn. But are you guys familiar with that? It's a color code that you use to kind of grade what we call anemia or red blood cell status. So that's something I look for visual inspection of sheep, is I look at their feet, I look at their eyes, and I look at their body condition as kind of a primary focus, okay? These ewes right here, my understanding, they look like they're a hair cross ewe, so they're mostly hair genetics. And I believe these are all accelerated lambing ewes. And so these ewes are lambing more than once a year. And they're in contrast, so these ewes, most of these lambs look like they're less than 4 weeks of age. And then in contrast, these sheep here, another component of the Premier Fleck, I believe they have some annual lambing ewes. They're more of a wool-based sheep. And so if you look at these, so these guys are, the way they're looking, I'm guessing they're going to lamb starting in about 2 to 3 weeks on average, okay? These ewes, on the other hand, are almost getting towards peak lactation, okay? Peak lactation in sheep that aren't selected for milk are going to be around 30 days. Now, these sheep are in pretty phenomenal body condition for peak lactation ewes. Now, that's important that they are, and partly, I imagine it's their feeding program. If you look right here, one would say that they have unlimited access to feed, don't they? They're certainly not limited, okay? Well, these ewes are, they have actually, maybe it's just this moment, they're more limited in their intake, okay? Now, these sheep we're trying to feed what we call unlimited feed. They're in peak lactation, and it looks like the feed here, I can't paw through it perfectly, but if you dig into it, it's mostly baled grass silage, and it's fermented, so it's true silage, it's not dry hay. It's fairly dry silage, but it's very well preserved, and it's got some grain in it as well. So this diet's an enriched diet. First of all, it's got a lot of fiber, but the fiber here, I can even tell just by looking at it, it's pretty high quality fiber. It's digestible. So there's pretty high energy. This is almost like a dairy cow ration, okay? And that's pretty critical for these. That's why these ewes are in good rig. They're in good body condition. If I were to score these ewes in terms of their body condition, the score we use is from 1 for a sheep you should never see. That's like walking skeleton, okay? And we don't want to ever see 1s. To 5s, which are super fat and, again, like a point that really shouldn't be reached too often. These sheep right here would be condition score 3.5 to 4, 3.5 easily. So most of these ewes are in very good body condition, which is kind of unusual for early lactation. Again, that tells me their feeding program's been very good now, but not only has it been very good now, but it's been, quite rich feeding program in late pregnancy as well. Just to give you kind of a crude index of body condition, you can look at your hand as kind of a rough guide. And if you feel your fingers on the back of your hand, okay, and you can kind of perceive the bumps just in your phalanges here, that's about a condition score 4, okay, just to give you an idea. So, and on the sheep, what the reference point is the top of their spine, okay, right over the loin area. If you were to take your hand, stick it over the loin of a sheep, which I can't quite reach out there and do right now, but it's very convenient when you have them in a handling system. You can condition score them. I can condition score them just by looking at them because I've seen a lot of sheep in my life. And these sheep, fortunately, don't have much wool, so that makes it a bit easier. But I can kind of perceive their condition just by the way they walk and kind of jiggle, or not. And so condition score 4, if you were to feel the backbones, would be like the back of your hand. In contrast, condition score 2, which is on the thin side, would be like your knuckles. So you'd feel those spine really prominently, okay? Not only the top of their spine, but if you're on the loin of the animal, they have what they call the lateral process, spinous process of the backbone, and then the lateral. You can feel that side of that loin. That'd also be kind of bumpy too. like a 2. And then a condition score 3 is like the back of your fingers here. If you give it, just to give you an idea, that would be like you can feel the bumps, but they're not very pointy, not very prominent. So, you know, these ewes are actually in very good condition, and if you count up the number of lambs in there, I think there's a few raising singles, but nearly all of them have twins, and so probably because there's not a whole lot of triplets in there, it helps to keep sheep stay in a little bit better body condition. But still, you know, there's mostly twins in there. That's a very, you know, very good body condition score for sheep. So these sheep over here, looking at them, they're actually almost a little easier to see because even though they're wool sheep, luckily they've been shorn looks like a month ago or so. These sheep are more, actually, I'd almost say they're leaner. I mean, on average, they're slightly more lean than those ewes. And these ewes were probably backgrounded in a winter pasture, I'm guessing, and brought in to the barn probably for shearing in January, which is fine. They're on a production system where they don't need quite the same groceries as these ewes do. So these ewes are fed appropriately for their stage of production. So they're again, these ewes, you can see they're just starting to show udder development. So they're sort of 115, 120 days of pregnancy. And I'd like to see these ewes about at least a condition score 2.5, 3 would be ideal. And I'd like them to gain even towards a condition score 3.5. And looking at these ewes, if you look at their spine, you can barely perceive it, but you can kind of see just a little bit of it. And that's about a condition score 3, 3.25, and that's where a lot of these ewes are. Some are a touch less, whatever. That's close though. But I wouldn't want to short these guys on groceries now because it looks like most of them are going to have at least twins. They look fairly prolific sheep. You can just look at them now. They have the body capacity. They're going to have close to 200% drop, I'm guessing. And so, you know, actually the quality of feed they need is pretty much what they need right now. And the problem with these ewes is what? They can't eat as much as these ewes. And partly it's because they've got competition in their belly, but it's more than a physical limit. It's like there's a physical limit in size of their rumen because of the developing pregnant uterus. But just in terms of their, we'll call it metabolism, they can't eat as much. They just don't have the same appetite drive. So therefore, their quality of diet has to be almost better at this point than these, okay? Because they can't expand their intake. These guys can, these guys can't. So, you know, once you get to this stage, your opportunity to change their body condition is kind of limited. You don't want to have them too thin coming into late pregnancy. With a really optimized feeding system with some good quality forage and grain, you might pick up a half a condition score, but that's about it. So body condition score in a sheep, this size sheep, a full condition score change is probably going to be 10, 12 pounds. Okay, so you want to think about it in terms of weight. So these animals, like if I put 5 or 6 more pounds on them, I'd be happy. That'd be good. Outside of their growing lambs, okay, a little bit of body condition on them. I would probably get that returned to me in slightly higher lamb survival and slightly better milk production of the ewes. The balance point in all of that is if I were feeding a bunch of ewes with singles, I could potentially have a little more problem with dystocia because I might have bigger lambs. Dystocia is just difficult birth. But I can tell there aren't too many singles in here, so I want to game plan to feed them pretty nicely. And I'm going to see a return on my investment and easier lambing, easier management of the flock. So those are some obvious things to point out. Again, I would like to look at the mucous membranes of the sheep. Probably should have a handling system to do that, but look at that eyelid. And if you're not familiar with how to do that, you simply peel the lower eyelid down and look at basically the red part of their eye. And that should be very red, like the color of your shirt, really, okay? And if it's pale, like, I don't know, maybe pattern on your shirt, that's a bit of a problem. And that tells us that they're probably, it's parasitism The primary parasite we'd see here in Iowa and many parts of the country is one called Homunculus contortus, or barber pole worm, simple terms. And that's a true bloodsucker. And it's a problem, even in the middle of winter, on ewes that are lambing in the middle of winter, if they've got a reasonable infestation going into the fall, those parasites wake up and become alive, and actually they're in hibernation. They're not causing any problems to sheep. But right at birth, pretty much when they lamb, like these ewes, if they had an infection, it would expand, and you'd start seeing sheep with signs of parasitism. You'd see some mucous membranes would be light and pale even. Sometimes it go quite pale. Are you guys familiar with what bottle jaw looks like? Okay. If you raise sheep, you've probably seen it, you know, because it's kind of a consequence of, and some sheep are going to escape your control system with parasites and show this problem, but they get this kind of swelling underneath their jaw. And that's just a consequence of having lost too much blood and losing blood protein. So I guess what I'm saying is that's a good thing to inspect on your flock in late pregnancy, is just, you know, if you have anemic sheep going into late pregnancy, they're going to be much more anemic in early lactation. So that's something you should be screening for when you're shearing your ewes. And in that case, you may need to do a deworming treatment right when they're in the jug, right in the birth period, right at birth. Because they're usually okay in late pregnancy, but as soon as they give birth, they go nuts. And it isn't an absolute. I probably wouldn't treat every sheep in your flock, but you might want to at least treat the ones that are looking clinical. Okay. So as far as body condition score targets, you know, we want them to be a 3.5 at lambing if we can, and we'd like them to. And these ewes are above that right now. Really, they're pretty much above that. And if I could manage them so they stayed at that throughout lactation, that'd be phenomenal. And it looks like they've done that. And partly that's explained because they don't have a lot of triplets on them. But we do need to feed them a better ration. And if I had to guess, the protein content of this feed is probably in the teens, like probably 15, 17%. That's about what you want for lactation. These sheep, in contrast, because they're pregnant, their protein requirements are a little bit lower. If I had forage that was still high energy, but a little lower in protein, you might want to feed them. So So we want high energy, and here we want everything. We want high energy and high protein. But energy is the biggest issue for here. And so it's okay to feed them some extra protein. It's kind of hard, actually, to find forages that are high energy, low protein. They just kind of don't exist. Some high-quality grass would fit that. So, you guys have any questions you want to hit me on for anything? Yep.
Sorry, going back to your slideshow.
Okay.
When you put your lambs and things into your clover and your ryegrass, your very high, rich pasture, how do you stop the scours and things when they come from a different feeding?
Yeah, that's a good question. Generally speaking, we don't have huge transitions in forage quality in our farm, but sometimes we do get some nutritional scours like that. And, you know, sometimes, okay, one of the more dramatic ones is to take them from permanent pasture to those brassicas, okay? They do tend to scour there. I don't see as much of a problem with the clover pastures necessarily, but to take them from, like, probably more of a tall fescue type forage to brassicas, usually where I plant my brassicas, I've got in it, I give them a choice, okay? So I have a field, like a buffer zone or a ditch or something that I'll also fence so they don't have to eat just the brassicas. And so usually I can come up with a natural transition. So over 4 or 5 days they get a choice. And then, I don't know, after about a week, they're ready to go. Their rumen's usually adjusted. But if I can, anytime I can create, and it's interesting you ask that because at MSU we're starting to plant, the university we're starting to plant more of these forage crops. My farm manager is relatively new, and sometimes it's intuitive to me just to do that. But if we don't do that, we do see kind of loose feces. The consequence of it hasn't been dire. It's just it'd be better if they didn't have to go through that. But the challenge with that is differentiating that nutritional scours from parasites. And that's a tricky one, and it usually requires fecal egg exams to know the difference. One last question, I guess. I got time. This goes very quickly, yes. I heard you ask about protein. I couldn't quite hear the rest.
When you want to give them more protein, a lot of people have concerns about pumping up their brain too much. A lot of people don't even do that.
Yeah.
Bigger fetuses is a problem.
Yeah.
Do you have those concerns?
The only time I have that concern is if I'm raising sheep that aren't very productive, that are having singles, a lot of singles. I'm not concerned about it with prolific sheep too much. So yeah, I'm concerned they're not going to get enough energy more than anything. Yeah.